There's nothing like being amongst the mountains, and when it comes to landscape photography, mountains make up the bulk of my portfolio. And even though I grew up on the east coast of Australia, once I started to get amongst mountainous landscapes, it completely changed me. Enough so that I upped and moved to the South Island of New Zealand, and across the past decade or so, I've pretty much based a lot of my photography around mountainous landscapes. So in this video, I want to give you some tips for photographing the mountains that I think are going to help you moving forward and hopefully give you some insight and inspiration for your photography. All right, let's take a look. Before we get into specifics on composition, location and lighting, let's talk about gear. There is no one particular way to compose and photograph the mountains. What I suggest is to be equipped with the big three: the ultra wide angle lens, a mid-range lens, and then of course a telephoto lens. Really, the mountains can be captured at any given time on any of these lenses, and sometimes you might even be able to get a shot on all three at the same place at the same time and walk away with three completely different images. So if you are planning an expedition out into a mountainous landscape, keep in mind that you may utilize any of the main three lenses at any given time. Now I'm going to go into specifics now on composing with these different lenses, but definitely if you can, you want to be able to have all three lenses. If I was only going to have one, it's just so hard to say. I'd probably lean towards more of an ultra wide angle lens, but what can happen in the mountains if you just get the right light and particularly the right atmosphere, then this is where the long range lens is going to come in handy. The long lens, this is a 100 to 400 mil, you might have a 70 to 200, something like that. This really allows us to go in and isolate the subject matter, and if you do have that snowdrift or beautiful atmosphere and layering, this is the lens you're going to want. So it's really hard to narrow down and say one specific lens. Let's talk about composition tips in regards to these three lenses anyway. With the wide angle lens, the main reason I'm using this for photographing mountain scenes is to incorporate the surrounding environment. When we're in the mountains, yes, the mountains are the key subject and generally what we're there for, and we're looking up and admiring. However, we might also enjoy everything else that's in that whole area. In New Zealand, where I am in Fiordland, what I really love is the combination of combining the lush temperate rainforest with the mountain backdrop. To me, that is just absolute paradise. The wide angle allows us to do that. So my key tip is, if you're including foreground matter, some kind of midground, and then obviously mountains in the background, balance is everything. And often I'm placing the mountains in that centralized part of the frame, then using foreground as a way to create either a natural frame or to lead the eye through to where those mountains are. Now, the key consideration is keeping in mind the diminishing perspective. You might have heard me talk about this before, but this is where we're trying to show a size decrease beginning in the foreground, progressing into the midground and then the background. And the best way to do this with the ultra wide is by getting very close to the foreground. By doing that, you're going to stretch it out and really emphasize the details and make it look very large in the frame. Then naturally, anything beyond that will look a little bit smaller. And because we have that size differential, we create the illusion of three-dimensionality in our two-dimensional photograph. It looks more three-dimensional now because we have a near as well as far. So get in close with an ultra wide to create that diminishing perspective, and try to have multiple layers there for the eye to hop through, leading us towards the mountain in the background. With the mid-range lens, something like a 24 to 70, 24 to 105, this is the Tamron. If I want to make the mountains more impressive and somewhat reflect how the human eye is seeing the mountains, the wide angle might make them look a little bit smaller. The telephoto is obviously going to make them look much bigger and fill the frame. The mid-range is our way of saying, hey, look, this is more or less what I'm seeing with my field of view. And I like to use this in a similar way by building up layers in my composition. Putting my mountains in that background area, but then making sure that I still have some kind of framing generally at least something off in the distance in the midground, and if I can, get something in that foreground. The key with using this lens though is taking advantage of that little bit of compression that we can't quite get with the ultra wide. Zooming in around 35, 50, 70 mil is going to allow us to compress the scenery, get that background, those mountains coming in closer to the midground and foreground, making those look grander and more impressive. So this is a great lens for doing that. It's just a little bit harder in my mind compositionally than an ultra wide. With the mid-range, you really need to be strategic. And my main tip is try to avoid overlapping those layers too much. We want to have clear separation. We don't want foreground matter cutting up and hitting the midground or background because we lose that sense of depth. So make sure your layers have separation as much as possible, and that will really let the eye roll on through to those beautiful mountains in the back. Lastly, the telephoto lens. When it comes to photographing mountains with this lens, it's one of those ones that it's very hard to plan when you're going to use this, because in my mind, it's all about the right light and the right atmosphere. That can really make the image work effectively. So if I'm in the mountainous landscape and it's a crystal clear day, the mountains are very grand and beautiful, but through the long lens, I think it's just too simple of an image, very flat, not very dynamic. If we have some kind of atmosphere, so low cloud, fog, mist, etc., even better would be cloud above the mountain, atmosphere below. Now you have a peak which is shrouded in more mystery. It looks a bit more imposing, and it creates a feeling that is just so different from if you just had a clear day. So that's what you're looking for. When you're out in the landscape with a long lens like this, and you're looking at those mountains, start to really tune in and look for the frame within the frame. You're going to have a huge field of view. Start to really look along the ridgeline and the peaks specifically, and look for a little point of interest. So when it comes to mountains in particular, you really want to have a peak there or a point, and that's going to give a real natural resting place for the eye. If you just have a long flat ridgeline, it's really hard to direct where the eye is going. So I'm always looking for interesting points, peaks, craggy sections on the mountain, some kind of layering as well, and then the pinnacle is getting that right light and atmosphere together. Another tip with photographing mountains, different light will give completely different results. If a mountain is backlit, front lit or side lit. I think probably the best light in my opinion is side light, because it really reveals the contours in the mountain, and we get some beautiful shadows coming off where the areas of light are, and that's really makes a mountain more three-dimensional. When the scenery is backlit, that can be very dramatic, and I like shooting backlit scenes, but you've got to keep in mind the mountain will look a lot flatter compared to if it's being side lit. The front light, that can be nice as well, but I generally like to wait until the light is low on the horizon, and that way we're just getting that front light on the summits. Generally it's going to be golden light then as well, could be pink or red, even better. If you have front lit mountain subject matter and there's too much light, the whole scene will look a little bit flat, and it won't be very dramatic or dynamic compared to the side light or the backlight. I hope these little tips have helped you and given you some food for thought with your mountain photography. If you have any questions at all, please leave them below. I appreciate your support of the channel. Hope you enjoy another video soon, and I'll catch you next time.